So today we're going to talk about this research paper, Plasticity as the Mirror of Empowerment, and it's put out like 90% by Google DeepMind and then by University of Alberta as the university that they're utilizing to publish the paper under. And then so this paper is very interesting overall. As we go through and find more and more answers. The question has always been, the big question has been like, how exactly do these models work, right? That's the big question within research communities. The big question is to like why there's so much questions around AI in general overall, right? You can break it down and say that it works mathematically and that it works via mathematical equations, etc. And that's exactly how it works, right? But why does that math work? That's the big questions that people don't understand. And we're starting to understand more and more around that. And why does the math work? Because the math works the same way that it works within your brain, is honestly the more and broader conclusions that we keep drawing within this. That's what this paper does, and breaking it down as well. Essentially breaking down this research paper, if I were to break it down very simplistically, inside of you, there are two wolves. You have the proactive wolf and the reactive wolf. And the proactive wolf is a perfect mirror of the reactive wolf. And both wolves are dependent on the environment and they interact. So all of our complete learning process, anything that you ever do, it's all learning based off of environment. You as a person, how you are, how you're structured, how you think, what you think about people, etc. It's all based off of environmental interactions, right? You dislike people, there's reasons, environmental reasons why you dislike people. I dislike people because I've had environmental experiences, right? Or I like people because I've had good environmental experiences. Whatever it is, it all boils down to environmental experiences. And then so when we break that down and we understand how environmental experiences work, there's two levers within that, right? There's a passive reaction to an environmental interaction, and there's a reactive reaction to an environmental reaction. And then so essentially within this paper, that's what they break it down to. And they break that down into two concepts, empowerment versus plasticity. And then so think of empowerment as the reactive version of like interacting with the environment, right? And so the the proactive version. And then so proactive meaning that you will go through and like at the very highest ends of empowerment, you just would flat out ignore all of the environmental indicators, right? Like you are the master of your domain, you're a master of nature, you have 100% conquered nature, you're outside of nature overall. You have your environment at that point no longer is a factor to you, right? You only control and dictate the environment and not the other way around. And that would be the extreme end of empowerment. The extreme end of plasticity would be like a classical computer where that's absolutely no control whatsoever of the environment. Like there might be, you do interact with the environment or with an environment, but you don't, and like you have zero influence over the environment overall, right? You're just running functions and you're going to run those functions whether or not the environment changes or not. And then the environment can change around you. You don't directly influence that. You're very just 100% reactive at that point, right? 100% plastic would be the end of that equation. So you have, and then you have in between within that, right? Empowerment versus plasticity. And then I think that like up front, I would assume that people would assume that like one of these is good or bad versus the other, but what the paper kind of dives into and points out, and very specifically and mathematically, as all of these papers do, is that there are, it's a balance that needs to be struck within this, and that there's trade-offs, right? It's a perfect mirror. And then so a model that is more proactive is going to, it's going to be hard for the model to take information from the environment and be reactive, and then also the opposite, right? And then so you need and you want that balance, and then in certain instances, in certain times, you would want it to be more proactive versus more reactive. And then also too, the other insightful thing to mention and point out as it relates to this particular research paper on this particular topic is that this doesn't 100% just apply to agent to environment interactions, as I kind of hinted to with my first analogy, right, where I utilized agent to agent interactions, like people to people, like do you like people or dislike people based off of your experiences. So that's that's agent to agent, right? And then in that instance, that agent to agent interaction is also an environmental interaction. So though that's all classified under that same thing. And then so you have to treat agent to agent interactions within the same process, the same rules. All of it dictates and follows that you have within agent to environment interactions within this full-on equation. And then within that, they break through and they come up with some various propositions, and then break them and some definitions. Right? To me, it's like one of their latest propositions that they have. It's like proposition like 4.8, I think. Let me see. Theorem 4.8, yeah, which is about tension, right? So the plasticity, empowerment, tension, and that's where they break down, and essentially all of this comes together where you have how they interact together, right? So therefore, an agent cannot simultaneously maximize its plasticity and its empowerment. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. In fact, the achievable levels of empowerment are strictly determined by the agent's plasticity and vice versa. The latter part of the result indicates that in extreme cases, a high plasticity can ensure that the agent has zero empowerment and vice versa. Notably, the tension only comes about when we consider this advanced mathematical equation where they're both combined and recognized within the equation. So therefore, this tension may dissipate as the intervals change. In this way, agents may oscillate between phases of high plasticity and high empowerment, but cannot simultaneously maximize both. A deeper examination of this trade-off and its implications for the design of agents is a significant opportunity for future research. And that's where they cut it off within that. And that's, so that's the end of the scientific discussion within that as it currently stands. Right? We've gone kind of like from like nature versus nurture to it's both nature and nurture are extremely important, and that the kind of the nature and the process within that dictates the nurture, but nurture is very vitally important within the overall equation, and more important in the overall equation. And we're starting to narrow down exactly the levers within that equation, right? And that's kind of how I frame all of this up within this very succinctly, right? And then at this point, like I see, so when I overall look at these things and this research from a broader scale, I'm starting to see flat out a schism that exists, right? There's so the bottom line is that you think that either these models are thinking units, that they're operating essentially in the same realm of what we would call thinking, thought, reasoning, etc., or you think that that's 100% marketing hype, you think that that's corporate speak, people just making stuff up, whatever camp you want to put it into on the other side of that, right? And there's a huge camp that exists on that side within the West overall, right? And then so within these arguments, and then within that, it's more and more. I mean, this is Google DeepMind, right? This initially caught my paper. So when I go through and I'm reviewing papers overall, right, the kind of my big thing now is I know to look for lots of authors on the paper, right? And then so if there's lots of authors on the paper, I know it's going to be an interesting paper. And that's generally the first thing I look for. And so that's what caught my eye about this overall, right? And then so it's not small camps that are making these arguments overall, right? And then the argumentation for that these models aren't thinking, aren't reasoning, there's less and less actual scientific ground to stand on. You're essentially taking the argument back to zero, to plan zero, and saying we have absolutely zero idea whatsoever what's going on within these models if you're taking that approach at this point, right? Because it's very clearly, to me, this is the avenue and the approach that we're dealing with agents, and we're dealing with reasoning, and then we're dealing with essentially the scaling laws and the limits of reasoning and how people reason and learn, etc. overall. And then so to me that opens up a lot of areas for exploration. And then these are kind of things and concepts that I've been talking about, honestly, for a few years now, right? Like, and then so the big thing to me within that, and what you'll notice in all of my models that I build, like my Zyra-based models, resonance-based models, etc., is that they're all based off of this concept, because to me, more sensory data is better, right? So they break that down, and specifically within the earlier points of this research paper where they talk about the inputs versus the outputs, right? And then so this whole equation is dictated by the number, type, and quality of sensors that the agent has. And then so that's something that they start to break down within this paper, but honestly, my read on it is that these researchers haven't broken this equation down to this level where they fully kind of have started to grasp this, or they don't put it fully within this research paper. This is my analysis of these things overall, which is that you can take their base equations of the like input and output needing to be the same and similar, and then you just stack more and different types of sensors, right? And like it's not just more sensors, it's more varied sensors, and then making sure that they're all just like a duplication of sensors isn't going to do much. But so I would say, if I were to break it down mathematically as they do within this paper quite elegantly, that 50 sensors would be better overall than one, but you would hit like a massive roadblock like instantly. Like it would plateau very quickly, right? But if you had 50 varied sensors compared to 50 of the same of duplicative sensors, it would just skyrocket. Like the difference would be off the charts dramatic, right? Is what I want to point out within that overall, and that's kind of what I've noticed within this plasticity versus environmental empowerment equation. I think the last thing to note within this is that and it does so. This ties into and plays into the whole AGI discussions and everything that people have and think around within that, right? So we essentially have a new roadblock that we didn't know existed before when it comes to those discussions, which is that theorem, the proposition 4.8, specifically, as I mentioned before, right? This theorem 4.8. So this introduces major tension for AGI as well, right? This plasticity empowerment tension can be the AGI and tension equation, because so essentially what it's saying is that we can't maximize both plasticity and empowerment, which is what would be needed for AGI. So within that, though, we can't maximize both at the same time. And then so with is it possible to give it enough instances and enough training of plasticity situations and enough for empowerment where you combine those, and then those would become kind of like a superpower? I don't know, right? And that's where they leave a deeper examination of this trade-off and its implications for design if agents is a significant opportunity for future research. This is the biggest area for future research that I see within this, right? Is that this maximizing and understanding further this plasticity to empowerment tension. I think everything with regards towards AGI within this would ride forward within that. And I'd say so on the topic, the general topic of AGI, I've been having more and more conversations kind of around that recently. Just more people have been interested in it, kind of in my general conversations. Do I think that this is do I think like at this point, all of this combined gets us 100% to where we need to be for AGI? No, I think we're still, this gets us closer and closer and closer. I think we're now like 90% of the way there. And then maybe like 2 years ago, we were like 70% of the way there. So we made dramatic progress, and we're almost there, but we still have gaps, right? And we're still introducing new gaps that we didn't know existed, right? Like this plasticity empowerment tension that exists, this theorem 4.8, it wasn't theorized and actually put into like as strict terms until now, right? Until we're looking at it here. So there's still big questions within that, and then to me, the biggest question that still remains as I go forth, I have two honestly big questions that remain for me as it goes forth within this, and they're kind of tied possibly, but I'm not 100% sure that they're tied. So the first one is continuity of a model's presence. So like meaning like so as a general human, you're one entity, right? You are one person, and I say that generally because there's are people that exist like with like a multiple personality disorder, etc. Right? And I think that's important to understand within these equations and within these models, because to me, if it can happen to a human brain, it could happen to a model brain as well, right? And then so I like flat out my perception of models at the moment is that like every single model that exists has a very extreme form of multiple personality disorder, like to the extreme. It's how I internally look at models, right? Because they have zero internal grounding as to like their self, and then within models you can see like, so I think that they can do and often are like very specifically developed to have like a like singular personalities, or like to drive into a singular function, and then that's I don't know how the model internally represents that as its model, right? Because in that instance, you take a model and it's, I mean, very like in simple terms, like a multiple personality disorder is kind of the best way to honestly break it down within that. And then so I think that there's a lot more work to be done within that, a lot more exploration. I don't understand it more than I can lay it out within that, and I don't know if it's good or bad overall, right? Like it could be good, it could be bad, I don't know. Like I know that this it kind of, I can see that this exists. The second thing to me, like the bigger thing, and again, perhaps it's tied, perhaps not, is that these models don't have direct interaction and relationship with time, and that raises a lot of questions to me overall, which is like why I very rarely like to talk about it, because it raises physics questions to me. Like, I mean, bottom line, flat out, like when I think about that, like, so these models, they don't understand how to interact with time, period. Right? Which means that they don't have a direct interaction with time. We haven't programmed it into them, and then so they like their understanding of time is strictly the human conception of time, and then so within that everything that I know about physics, how the models work, that I've seen before, etc., 100% points to the fact that time is a human construct. I mean, that's like if I were to break it down in simplistic physics terms, that's the line of reasoning that points me to within that. That is, let's say, very, very, very contradictory to the theory of relativity, for example, which states that like space-time is very integral, and that like space-time, right? Like, so it's an integralized concept. And then so I don't know what to do with that particular tension, but like to me, that's the biggest tension that faces with AGI, is that these models don't understand at the moment time, and I guess they should, but they don't. So why don't they? And I mean, like I'll leave that as a bigger, like, there's more qualified physicists than I will ever be that you could tell me why that tension exists there. And hopefully you will someday. And then so if we figure that out, then we'll figure out how to get past that problem. And then so I think that we do still have, just a few more miracles to go before AGI, but there's some pretty big miracles and there's some physics miracles. But this does get us steps closer. Plasticity as the mirror of empowerment. I'll leave a link to the description of this particular research paper. And if you like this type of content, please like, subscribe. Thank you very much.